As you share with us your ministry. Looking forward to hearing all about it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll have a bit of a movie or a slideshow kind of thing with.
Next time we'll bring the popcorn.
Yeah, well, yeah, popcorn would have been good. Oh, what happened here? Oh, we pressed something.
And we pressed something.
Something got pressed that we didn't want. Disappeared. Our thing disappeared.
Oh, here, just press on it.
I'll press on that.
Will it come back?
So just press it. Okay.
Oh.
On your presentation, it should pop.
There
Yeah.
we go.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, there we go. So this is the passage this morning. We'll just maybe read it again together. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. After sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage. I am here." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. And Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and he began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. "You have so little faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" When he climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshipped him. "You really are the Son of God," they exclaimed. So this morning, I'd like to, keep a few things in mind as we share this morning in regard to this passage. A couple of things that struck me as we were preparing for this. It said, and we have a lot of time this morning, don't we? We have a lot of time. Good. Yes, Mongolian time. We're talking Mongolian time, which is even longer than African time. Yes, yeah. So anyways, Jesus insisted that his disciples get into the boat. Just think on that. And then the whole thing at the end here, the outcome of the whole thing, and the disciples worshiped him, and they recognized that you really are the Son of God. So, okay, we'd like to speak. I don't know how. Map shows us where Mongolia was. I was going to ask who knows where Mongolia is, but it's fairly clear. When we first went out, we put up a map that showed it being in Africa, and a lot of people didn't even recognize that it was in the wrong place. So, but it is between Russia and China, and so maybe I'll let you go through. We have just a bunch of, that's the location of it, and we'll just run through just a little bit of just slides about the country. This is just some cultural pictures and whatnot before we get into stuff. What's that? Oh, you can talk, yeah.
Can you hear me if I talk? Is that picking me up? Okay. Or bring it down a little bit. I'm short. I'm a lot shorter than him. So we headed to Mongolia in 2002, 14 years ago. That was the first getting out of the boat for us. That was a big getting out of the boat. And we just wanted to share a little bit about Mongolia itself before we kind of share our story about what God's been doing. But for those of you who don't know much about Mongolia, it's a country of 3 million people and 35 million animals. So it's the most sparsely populated country in the world. There's the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. I'll go back to that map. The capital city of Ulaanbaatar has almost half the population living in that city alone. And there's between that and the other kind of cities that are spread out through the different provinces, probably 2/3 of the country lives in those cities. And then 1/3 of the country are still nomadic people. And they live out in the countryside. And if you see the little white tents in the background, those are yurts or gers, as they're called in Mongolia. And for the most part, all the nomadic people live in them. And yeah, it's a very simple subsistence living. And yeah, the people are short there. But it's interesting that the tallest man in the world is actually a Mongolian, was a Mongolian. He was 3 meters tall. So they have an odd gene there that has some very tall people. This is just kind of the national dress that people lived in. When we moved there in 2002, I would say a majority of people still dress like this. Now you only really find countryside people or kind of older people that dress like this. For the most part, most people wear Western clothing now. And children are children wherever they live. In Mongolia, they milk everything. So they have yaks and camels and goats and sheep and horses and yeah, everything. They milk everything. Horses, actually, fermented mare's milk is the national drink of Mongolia. So there's millions of horses in the country, but it's not because they do ride them, but the main reason that they have millions of horses is so they can milk them. So this is milking goats in the morning, and they tie all their heads together, and then they just go around the back and milk each goat. So it's an easy way to do it, right? So horses, really they have lots of animals there, but they love horses. They're passionate about horses, both riding horses and milking horses. And really for a Mongolian man, a nomadic way of life is pretty good. You get up in the morning, by then your wife's already been up, she's milked all the animals, she's made the fire, she's made your tea, and you roll out of bed and you have your tea, and then you get on your horse and you ride out in the countryside and watch all your animals and chat with your buddy and have a cigarette, which most of them smoke, and then, you know, you kind of, by the end of the day, you go home. By then your wife has processed all the milk into cheese, she's collected all the firewood, she's taken care of the kids, she's made your supper and made your evening tea, and you have your tea, and then in the evening you sit around and play cards again with your buddies, and then you go to bed. You know, so it's great for the Mongolian men, but it's not really great for the Mongolian women. And to be honest, the nomadic lifestyle is really dying out in the country. So for a number of reasons. One, because most women don't want to do it, but another because really there's not enough land to sustain the amount of animals, and they've overgrazed the land. So there's less and less grazing land. So it's the nomadic way of life is dying out. So there's yaks, lots of yaks. And yes, we do have camels. Okay, I have to give you a joke. Just because my uncle gave me this joke, as we were showing these pictures to my uncle, he said, okay, what do you call a 2-humped camel? Do you know what a 2-humped camel is? It's a Bactrian camel. What's a 1-humped camel?
Dromedary.
A dromedary, that's what it's called. So what do you call a no-hump camel? Horse. Humphrey. Okay, you can blame my uncle on that one. So yeah, we're just showing you a few pictures from the countryside. Really, the countryside is beautiful. The countryside of Mongolia is beautiful. In fact, most of it, or much of it, is like Canada. It's on, the capital city is on the 49th parallel, so it's really like, right,
A little bit south of you guys.
yeah, it's very similar to like where you're living right now, right? So a lot of it's like Canada. This fall, we had an amazing fall. This is up near where we're living. Just some fall pictures. Yeah, the landscape's not a hardship for us. The province we're living in Mongolia is the breadbasket of Mongolia, so farming. And you can see there's a herd of sheep crossing that one part of the farm right there. And these are roads in Mongolia. There's only 2 main paved roads, one going north-south, one going east-west. And this is as good as they get. This is the good road. And then, really, the off-roads around that good road are what most of the roads are like. And even the good roads are never really stay in a state of repair that you can actually drive the good roads fully. You're always driving down the highway and then going off-roading and then back onto the highway. So that's the countryside, but for the first 12 years we lived in the capital city, which was really a concrete jungle. There was no cities in Mongolia before 1921, and that's when the Russians took over Mongolia and they kind of collected the Mongolians and made cities. And it's really, if you go into a Mongolian city, you actually would feel like you're in Russia. It's very communist built city. So we lived here for 12 years, and there's a bit of a story of how we left that city, but in that city, there's a downtown core of buildings, but the majority of the people actually still live in what they call ger districts. So if you see in the forefront there, it's like little tiny houses or gers, like the felt tents. And 80% of the population in the capital city still lives in this kind of condition. So there's no running water, there's only outhouses, and that's how you live, even in the capital city. So that's kind of a story, a bit about the country, and now we want to kind of share a little bit of a story of how we've moved from the country to the city and how God... from the city out to the country, and how that was, again, a time where, really God was asking us to step out of the boat.
So,
Now you have to go up again.
yeah, so again, this verse was really instrumental for us in this, probably in the last year and a half of our transition from Ulaanbaatar, the capital city, to a place called Sukhbatar, which is in the northern part of Mongolia. And, I'll just read this verse first. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And so, all of us know that verse. We've seen that verse. We hear that verse. And it was interesting because when we were asked to come and share and stuff, and you're using the passage about, Jesus walking on the water and that. And there's, as our story unfolded, there's so many connections between that story and this passage and what our story looks like. And it was really cool because, for one thing, that passage in Matthew was instrumental for us way back, before we even went to Mongolia. We were living in Prince George, and we were very settled. We had a nice house in suburbia. I'm a geologist by profession, my background, and I'd been in the mining industry for years and years, and we are settled, but we'd always thought of, we both have missions backgrounds that go way back to when I was, my uncles, my dad's family. Even on my mom's side, there's the Wilmses that we're connected to. And we'd always thought when we got married that we would do missions at some point. And God brought into our lives a period, we call it, of holy discontent. And that passage was a key thing that kicked us into gear, kind of thing. I remember one day we were listening to a sermon on that, and that passage, and it came to that point where, you're to get into the boat, where, like I said, Jesus insisted, get in the boat. You have to get in the boat to get moving, to go to the other side. And I remember as soon as in that sermon, as soon as the guy said that, we just looked at each other. It's just like God hit us over the head at that moment and said, you need to get in the boat. But at that point, we didn't know what the boat was even. But it was just there's this moment in time that God said, it's time to move. It's time to get in. So anyways, so when we heard that was the passage that we wanted to connect our sharing to, I thought, well, we have history with that passage. So anyways, Mongolia. So Ulaanbaatar is the big letters there for those, the big dark. And up by the red arrow, there's the town where we are now. And so as Marlene shared, we moved to Mongolia in 2002, and there's a whole history of stuff that God did in our lives that got us there. But we'd like to share a little bit from 2006 to present, kind of things that have happened. So in 2006, we'd been there, was it 4 years at that point? And we were involved in an inner city ministry. We were doing kids clubs and working with families at risk, so children and families at risk. And we were running a kids club, basically a Sunday school on a Saturday kind of thing in the city. And it was interesting because when we went to Mongolia, we just had got in the boat. And we didn't know where it would take us in terms of what was the other side, what it would look like. We didn't really have, per se, a game plan. We were just, like that verse said, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. We had heard God's call, and it was very clear that God had called us to Mongolia. So we got in the boat, and God took us to Mongolia, and we landed there. We did language study, and he said, okay, what now? So a ministry presented itself with an NGO that was doing this inner city work. And he said, okay, well, there's a need there. We didn't feel actually particularly called to that ministry at that point. He said, but there's a need there. And God had opened a door for us to be involved with this kids ministry. So we stepped into that. So from 2003, 2004 on, we'd been involved with this ministry. Then in 2006, kind of out of the blue, over a period of a month, God gave me a series of dreams. And I'd never had anything like these dreams before. And it was a whole thing about, on a kind of a wide open prairie plain, God laid out a plan very clearly, very specifically. It was almost like when God gave Noah the plan for the ark. It was just like, you do it like this, and you plant trees, you do these shelter belts, you do all this, and then you plant fruit trees like this, this, and this, over this landscape. And there's this whole picture of restoring this barren desert place to a land of fruit and abundance. And so over a period of a month, it was sequential dreams. And I thought, oh, what is this about? I'm a geologist. I'm a Mennonite background. My dad was a farmer. I have farming in my blood. And ever since I was a kid, I've loved to plant trees. Trees are my passion. Between rocks and trees, it's kind of like, it was a toss-up what I did with my life. And but ever since 4 years old, I was planting my first apple seeds. And I remember we grew up in Winnipeg, and we moved to, when my dad was transferred to BC when I was 12. I remember, we're going to God's country, because in BC, we can plant almost anything, So for trees, it was just, I was going to heaven. And so, which is what I did. I filled our yard in Port Coquitlam with everything I could grow. So that was in my blood. But here we're in Mongolia, we're doing this thing, and God gives me this thing on a scale like, I've never done anything like that. And here's this plan perfectly set out and laid out, and I thought, well, what do I do with this? This isn't, I had no inkling of this when we were called to Mongolia that we would do something like that. And so 2006, I sat on that for 2 years. I didn't do anything with that.
He didn't even tell me.
I didn't tell Marlene. And it wasn't until we went to a seminar, a conference in Beijing with an organization. It was all about coaching, leadership training, and whatnot. And so essentially we were coached and mentored kind of thing. And basically it was a seminar where you looked into your own design. So you could understand your own design so you could help other people with their design and talk to people so that you could draw out the things that God has put into people. And so at the seminar I put up my hand and said, I had this dream and I don't know what to do with it. So they kind of used that as an example. They said, okay, let's dig into Robert's story here and see what God has in this story. Why did God give him these dreams? And so the upshot of it all was at the end of this seminar, it was very clear. The leadership of this organization said, God is calling you to something. There is something very clear. It is totally, this tree thing is totally connected to your wiring. And we're going, oh, okay. So in the course of that, though, as well, like with Marlene, her gifting is hospitality. And so out of that, we saw this vision of what we'd say a retreat center and some kind of fruit tree horticultural project developing. And he said, well, this is something we'd never done before, but we could both see clearly we are wired for that kind of thing. And so in 2008, 2010, we got an NGO started in Mongolia called Trees of Life Restoration. And so when we got into this whole process, we could just see that God had birthed this thing through these dreams. It hadn't been on my radar at all to do this kind of thing. And so when we came to the step of starting the NGO, we were at a point in the history of Mongolia where the government had been allowing a lot of stuff to come into the country early on because they were very destitute. After communism ended in 1990, the whole country fell apart. It just collapsed economically. And so they were just accepting virtually anything, almost any wacko religious group or whatever came in. As long as you brought money and employed people, they let you in. But then economics got better, and they stopped doing that, and they're actually kind of kicking NGOs out and forcing people out because they didn't really like, especially the small NGOs that had any kind of religious affiliations. Because they said, those are just problems. We'll take the big ones that we can control, and we'll get rid of the little ones. So it was at that point in time where we said, we'll start our NGO. And we deliberately wrote into our bylaws of the NGO that we would do everything that we did according to biblical values. And they did not like that. And so we just laid it out there and said, God, if you're calling us to do this, then you have to get this NGO going. And so the upshot of it is we got our NGO. They accepted it. And so we said, okay, well, now we need land to do this thing. So this is 2010. And so in 2010, we started exploring. And so if you look on the map there's Ulaanbaatar. And there, you can't see, there's 2 other cities we should have drawn on there. But basically there's a triangle just to the north of Ulaanbaatar where 2/3 of the country's population live. There's 3 cities there. And so we thought strategically, okay, this is me kicking in. Okay, God, you've led us here. You've given us the NGO. And now we need land. And so all my professional expertise kicked in. And I started looking on Google Earth and doing all the research and targeting areas. Okay, God, where are we going to do this thing? And during that time, just before that time, God had given me a word from Nehemiah. And it said, it'll be a place where my name will dwell. And so we're going on this premise that, okay, the piece of land that we're going to find is a place where God will dwell. And so for the next 3 years, I looked for a piece of land. And nothing opened up. I drove that entire triangle with our vehicle. I explored all the areas. I knocked on every government door. I knocked on even private people's doors trying to make some connection with this to happen. And nothing came of that. And I was getting pretty low at that point. And during all that time, towards the end of those 3 years, I'd get to a place and I'd look around and say, God, so is this where you want to be? It's I was getting pretty, I'd say almost depressed about it and saying, okay, well, how do I identify? How do I see a place where the name of God will dwell? Here's all these pieces of land. They all look the same. They all look good. They all look prospective. But how do I discern a place where God's name will dwell? And so at that point, the government was getting on our case because we weren't planting trees. This was the mandate for the NGO, was to do this tree thing. And so we said, okay, well, we'll start doing seminars. And so we started doing training seminars, where we started searching out different groups of interested people that were interested in growing things. And we'd start doing training seminars in regards to mostly like fruit trees. So we're doing, propagation, pruning, grafting, all those kind of things. And then one day, Marlene came home. There's a store right across from our apartment. And she came home and said, there's a lady in the store across the road. And she's selling fruit trees she brought from Russia. And so I go, whoa, that's the first I've heard of that. So I run across the street, and right away, here's this lady. And right away, here's someone with, kindred spirit kind of thing. We talked, probably for 2 hours just about fruit trees and all the things that she said. I'm from, up this town, up where the Red Arrow is. And I have a whole bunch of friends. We're all trying to start doing this kind of stuff, and we know nothing about it. But there's all these trees that we can get from Russia, so we're just buying them and bringing them and trying to grow them. And so I said, wow, that's really cool. So I told her we're doing these seminars, and we have friends in your town. There's another missionary family in that town that we knew. And so we said, okay, we're going to maybe come up there and visit that family. And if we come up, can we visit, come and do a seminar with you? And she said, sure. So in the course of a few months later, we went to visit that family. And we called her up and said, can you arrange this to do a seminar there? And she said, sure, gladly, And so we went up there, and we did our seminar. And after the seminar was over, a few people came up to me and said, "Can we talk to you?" And she had invited some of the local government people to that seminar. And it turned out that these represented the governor of that area, and said, "Can you stay the night? And we'd like you to meet the governor tomorrow morning." Going, "Oh, okay." And we had no clue. We came up to do a seminar and meet our friends. And so the next morning we met the governor, and they said, we like what we heard at this seminar, and we would like you to come up here, and we will give you a piece of land to do this thing. And it was just like, wow. And we were just blown away. It's just like, we didn't come here looking for land. This was not in our map, on our agenda, our radar at all. We had this triangle defined just north of Ulaanbaatar there. This is the target area, because that was strategic. And here we're being called right up to the Russian border, and said, well, that wasn't in our plans at all. And so we went back and talked to our friends that were there, and said, this is what just happened. And, oh, really? And they're going, oh, and by the way, they said, we haven't told anybody, but we're planning to leave here in the future. And we have properties here, this is the Evangelical Free. We have properties here, and the house that we had actually stayed in when we've gone up to visit them, they said, we're unloading that, and we will give it to you for a sweet song. If you come up here, we'll basically almost give that to you. And you're going, wow, what? And so we went away, and we started praying about this. So this is kind of where our story kicks in, where this whole thing of getting in the boat, insisting, Jesus is laying things out in front of us, saying, get in the boat, get in the boat, get in the boat. And we're saying, oh, is this for real? Because we'd spent 3 years looking for land, and suddenly, bang, bang, and it wasn't what we'd been looking for. And so this is the town of Sukhbadar, where this is all transpiring. So this is the main town, and where this houses we're talking about is kind of in the distant background toward those far hills. There's a kind of on the other side of the river there. And it was really interesting, because there's a whole process to getting land there. And we're totally ignorant. We're the foreigners, and and we think it's absolutely not at all like it is here. And so I said, okay, well, we'll move with this. And so we went back to Ulaanbaatar, and we were waiting, and all of a sudden we get a phone call. It says, this is in November 2013. And they get this phone call. There's going to be a meeting, kind of a town meeting, in next week on a certain day. And the way they worded it, it would be a good idea if you would be there, and you could present something about this project that you want to do in this area to get land. And the meeting was called the Citizens Committee meeting. And so I had no idea what that all meant. So I had my office manager, Mongolian guy, we went up to this meeting. And so you get there, and it's about 120 people. And it turned out it's like their business meeting. They do it twice a year. It's an annual business meeting. So they're talking about garbage collection and road repair and da-da-da-da-da. This went on for like 2 hours. And then they say, okay, and we have this foreign NGO here that's going to make a little presentation. And going, oh, okay, that's our turn. Okay. So I'd been sitting there, and there'd been this old gentleman sitting just in front of me. When you saw those pictures of the people in the traditional clothing, there was this old guy, probably in his 70s, sitting about 2 rows in front of me. And I'd met him, I'd shaken his hand and whatnot when I got there. And he seemed like a pleasant fellow. And so anyways, we get up, we hook up our PowerPoint thing, and and I'm about to say something, and this guy stands up. And he goes on this rant about we should never allow foreigners into our community. We should not give land to anybody. They're going to steal our heritage for our children. And he went on and on. And for me, it's like coming back to that passage in Matthew, when when he stepped out of the boat. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. I'm an emotional kind of guy when it comes to things like this. I was standing there, I hadn't said a word. And it was like, when Peter stepped out of the boat, and it says the waves in the darkness. And it was just like I stood up at the front there, and this guy's just ranting away, and it was just like I was just inundated. Like the waves were just coming over me. I said, Robert, you idiot, what are you doing here? These people don't even want you here. I should not be here. It was just wave after wave, and this guy went on for, I don't know, a few minutes. And I'm just going, God, what are we doing here? I don't belong here. This is just not the place for us. And so finally the chairman said, shut up and sit down, and let this guy at least have his say. And so then we did our little thing, and then said, are there any questions? And there, I think two people had just very kind of innocuous little questions. Oh, where are you from? And kind of this kind of thing, whatever. Just very. And then a lady stood up, and she went on for at least 5 minutes about why this should come to this area, why they needed it, why this would be good, why, just on and on and on. And then she sat down, and it was like, we got a standing ovation. Virtually everybody in the room basically stood up and was just clapping, just like massively. It was just like, I just stood there, just like, I was just absolutely floored. It was just like, it's like from the dark to all of a sudden, they do want us here. Oh, this is good. And for me, it was, again, like that passage says, how you think, well, how Jesus, he said, he grabbed Peter and, pulled him into the boat. And you think, well, what does that feel like when you're almost facing death, almost, and all of a sudden you're in the boat and you feel the boat under you and you say, oh, I'm still alive. And just that kind of that euphoria of being, no, this is, I'm alive. This is real. And so, yeah. So anyways, we did our thing. I sat down and I thought, wow, it was amazing. And so then the chairman says, oh, okay, so everybody in favor, put up your hand. Everybody against it. So it was like, I'd say 98% in favor. They put up their hands. So I said, okay. And so I was looking at my office manager. So what just happened here? And immediately after that, a whole bunch of people came around. And they started congratulating us. Welcome. You're now part of our community. And da-da-da-da-da. I'm going, what's the deal with this? Because when they'd worded come to this meeting, it'd be a good idea. We thought we'd just do an information presentation. This was the done deal. We had the land. That vote was the vote. And you're going, wow. So, it will just show you a few pictures. This is our community. So yeah, this is the street right in front of our house. So cows, it's an agricultural community. Most people, and it's a funny thing because this area, Shamar, is the name of the we call it a Somme, but the area where our land is. Shamar is the honey capital of Mongolia. And so they have cows and honey. So what does that make? The land of milk and honey. So this is the house that we were blessed with. And again, it was just an amazing thing for us because in our minds, we had always thought, okay, if we get a piece of land, it's going to be this, in the dreams, it had been this barren landscape. So I thought, well, yeah, we're old, but we can tough it. We can put one of those gears up and and live in that for a few years and eventually have something better. And here God had already been ahead of us and supplied this. This is all furnished. We could walk in and start living that day. And the land is 6 kilometers away from this on a little dirt road. And so we could develop this at our leisure. So it was all there. So what are those? Grapes! Yeah, so those are the first grapes ever in that part of the world.
The vines going
The vines
up
on the
house
house are all grapevines. Yeah, this is just our garden. It's a very fertile area. So this is our greenhouse we put up. Those are all fruit trees, growing our cherries and crab apples. And this is grafting is inside the greenhouse. Yeah, So we just started doing it. So we moved up there in end of May 2014. So this is the piece of land that was given to us. And it was interesting because I always think, okay, that verse that God had given to us in Nehemiah, in the place where his name will dwell. And I said, well, how do you find a place where God's name will dwell? God will find it for you. God will tell you where that is. And that's the reality. And when I stood on this piece of land after, we didn't choose it. The government gave us this piece of land. It was just a section that they had allotted for this kind of stuff. And I stood on it, and it was exactly like the dreams that I'd had. And all those 3 years, again, coming back to that verse, the sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. In all that time, I hadn't been following. I'd been using my technical expertise to say, okay, God, I've got this now. You've given us the NGO. You've given us the direction. And I can do this now. I know what soil looks like. I know what water looks like. I know what all the necessary ingredients look like and how they should be put together. And so I can do this now. And I could not find the place where God's name would dwell. And it was through this lady that we met across the street that led us to another relationship, and suddenly there's the land. And God says, no, this is it, and this is where I want you to be. So for us, this is where God's name can dwell, because it wasn't us. It had nothing to do with us. So this is us on our piece of land because it's lacking in a little bit of nutrients, so we had dumped 200 tons of manure from that little town of Shamar. And so we hired Mongolians to help us distribute the manure.
Spread by hand.
And so this is breaking the land for the first time. And so this is our plowed and beautiful sandy, silty loam soil. It's just beautiful soil.
Where did you get your equipment?
Oh, that we rented that. So yeah, at this point, that's one of our needs actually. So this is the guy in the blue jacket's a Mennonite fellow from Virginia that lives in a town south of us, and he helped us get this done. So I'd never built a fence like this in my life, and so he came up and got us started, and then we went to town, got some Mongolians, and they'd never built a fence like this either. Mongolians don't build fences like this. And so then we started planting shelter belts. So we bought trees from a little local nursery. And God had blessed us with a YWAM team from Colorado. 4 guys and 2 girls came up. And so there the whole time they helped us build the fence, they helped us plant the trees, and all this, it all came together. Again, it was just like, it was so amazing. And so, so this is us. We had to water all our planting. We didn't have a well on the property. So we had to haul water from our yard 6 kilometers away.
Water?
And water, and water, and water, and water. And we had a drought last summer for 2 months. It didn't rain at all. And so we watered a lot. So this is the truck, that's the well drill. And so then we proceeded to drill a well. So this, again, and this is, again, the dream, when I had the dreams, was all about restoration. It was about restoring the land. And when we drilled the well, we had we had to have a survey done before we could get a permit. And so he surveyed it and said, there's this and this and this and this strata, whatever. And it all turned out to be hokey. He was out to lunch. And so he started drilling the well, and we had 10 meters of sand, 20 meters of sand, 50 meters of sand, 86 meters of sand. And then we hit a gravel layer, and that's where the water is. And and it was just like, wow, this was, interesting place. And the one day shortly after this picture was taken, I was driving away, and I just stopped and looked back, and God just kind of said, just stop and have a look at this. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see the picture? And all of a sudden, it just struck me. What is 86 meters of sand? Wind-blown sand. What does that represent? This place was a desert for probably 1,000 years, literally. And so, and God's saying, that's the story of this land, desert. And now there's water flowing on this land, and there's trees growing on this land, and this land will never be the same again. And it was just like, because when you're in it, you're just busy, and you're just doing. It was a busy season, and you're just doing. And all of a sudden you stop and like you say, smell the roses, and you see the picture and going, yeah, it's never going to be the same again. And for us, it's just such a beautiful analogy for what's going on in the country with the people there. Because when you get into the communities there and you see the brokenness of the communities, and literally I'd say the Mongolian culture, the people have been a human desert. Emotionally, morally, spiritually, for at least as long as this has been a desert. And God's saying, this is what's happening on the land, but this is just a picture of what God wants to do in this community here. And so it's just like, wow, yeah. So this is just, we planted, these are all fruit tree seedlings that we planted. There's about 1,000 trees there that we've planted out there to trial them through this winter. They're spending the winter out there to see what survives. Yeah, and this is, dreaming over the land here now, this kind of picture. So,
Okay, going down? Okay. So, back to this verse, my sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. Really? This verse is an amazing verse and God gave it to us as we moved up north to this town. And really, as we moved up to this town, I was wrestling with God because I felt like God was giving Rob his side of the dream, but he was forgetting mine. We were getting this piece of land and he was going to do the agriculture, but the reality is we're moving way up to the border of Russia and Mongolia, and I thought, there goes my retreat center. No one's going to come up there. We're going to live in this isolated community. The only couple that was up there that were foreigners, they were leaving, and I was going to be up there by myself. And I'm a people person, and I also really felt called to hospitality and to hosting people. And so I thought, wow, God, what are you doing? And on the way driving up to when the government gave us our land, God gave me this verse as we were driving, and it's, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And God spoke to me really specifically. He said, Marlene, do you not trust that I know you? I know you. I know the gifting I've given you. I know the desires of your heart. He said, you know what? Just follow me. And it was amazing because we got up to the little town, and Rob went off to meet with all the government officials for the day, and he dropped me off at the one missionary family that was still there to their house. And this couple had 2 little kids, and she homeschools them every day, and she teaches them a Bible verse every week. And she's got like a huge chalkboard in her house that she writes the Bible verse in. And I walk in her house, and there on her big chalkboard is this verse: my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I knew before he even got back from the government, he was going to have this piece of land, right? So, and it's been so amazing to see how he does know us, because I watch Rob, and one day he's going to be known as a Johnny Appleseed of Asia, because God knew him. I think even better than he knew himself. I mean, he knew that he liked trees and everything, but he doesn't just like trees. He is gifted at growing trees and propagating trees, and he's creating new varieties, and I don't know, it's just fun, right? And it's because God knew him. And the crazy thing is God knew me, because you know what? We got up there, and in the first 6 months, we had over 300 visitors. So I'm not isolated. And in fact, in the last year and a half, we've had 450 overnight visitors. And so now we're asking God, okay, obviously you're bringing people to us, so what are we supposed to do with it, right? I feel like we're trying to figure out how to develop the retreat center. So anyhow, God knows us. But I think the other thing we realized moving up there is that God knows us, but he knows them. He knows them. He knows the people that we're called to. And we're just amazed at how God has placed us in the right place in terms of the people that we're able to interact with. So we're just going to show you a few pictures of some neighbors. These are some neighbors, and they're growing, it's a berry bush called sea buckthorn. Yeah, so they typically will grow all the root vegetables that the Russians taught them. It's like the potatoes, carrots, cabbage, turnips, onions. But in recent years, in this community, they've started growing berry bushes. So they have sea buckthorn and a gooseberry and a black currant. And now, because they're right on the Russian border, they're also bringing down a few fruit trees. So it's a very different neighborhood than most of Mongolia. Most of Mongolia, because they're nomadic, they don't know how to grow a thing. But I would say probably half of our neighbors have gardens, and a lot of them are very interested in learning how to grow things. So we just fit right in. And Rob's kind of become the tree doctor of the neighborhood. So this is just some other neighbors. And this woman here has a fabulous garden. Like, I've learned all kinds of things from her. So we garden, but we also have people into our home. This was a group of ladies from my neighborhood that I was teaching them how to make pickles. So they grow lots, but they don't know what to do with it. So I've been teaching them how to make carrot cake and pumpkin loaf and pickles and jams and
juice,
jams, juice.
dehydrate stuff.
Yeah. So these are our neighbor kids. Rob's been giving trees out to all our neighbors so that eventually we'll have the greenest neighborhood in the country.
All of Mongolia.
So, and one other thing about moving there at this season of our life is that we're instantly senior citizens. In Mongolia, you became a senior citizen at age 50. So we automatically are included in that community. And it's kind of one of these things where you just see, it's also just God's grace, because there's kind of an honor that they give to the senior people in their culture. And so, God's given us gardening neighbors, but he's also given us kind of honor in the community because of our age. This is a young couple, and he is the governor of our little subdivision. And yeah, he's one of them that we really feel like God's led us to. They, just a lovely young couple, and they often just drop by, especially the husband, because he's trying to learn English. So I think that's his excuse for dropping into our place. But it's interesting because he had lived in Korea for 8 months, and he'd started going to a church there. And so there's a spiritual hunger, and often he comes over to learn English, but our conversations turn around to spiritual things. So they're one of them that we feel called to. This picture, the gal in the pink sweater is actually our Mongolian daughter. She's been part of our family for the last 12 years, and the young fellow next to her is her nephew, and he's worked for us for the last couple summers. And yeah, it's just, again, when I think of how God brings us to the right place at the right time and for the right people, these are some of them that I really feel like God has put us in Mongolia for. This is a group of young men from the city, and again, we really feel drawn to the young men of the country because most of the men in the country end up being alcoholics and bums, really. And so, yeah, if we have a burden for anything, it's for the younger men of the country. And we had this group of young men that came up. There's another whole story behind that. You can maybe ask us later. But we just see how God is opening up our home for young men to come. So we also host people from all over. This is 2 families from China that came up. So missionaries from other countries that are sometimes weary end up at our doorstep. And these are some of the kids from our community center in the city that came up to visit. And we also host people from North America. This man, his name was Woody. He came up from Oregon this last year for 3 months. And he was like the Mr. Fix-It of the U.S. or whatever. And he came up and he built and fixed for 3 months. He was such a blessing to us. And this is the YWAM team that Rob mentioned earlier. So it was 4 young men and 2 women. The 2 gals loved to cook, which is great because they kept everybody fed. And the 4 young men helped us build our fence and plant all our trees and water our trees. And they chopped wood. And yeah, it was just a wonderful blessing. So this is a community of believers that's up in our community. And I just think that this is another one of them that God really prepared us for and has allowed us to be part of their lives. Very poor. Like there's really a lot of subsistence living in Mongolia, and our church is probably the poorest part of our community. So, but lovely people that we can see really God is living and moving in. So That was outside the church. This is inside the church. And this is the Mongolian couple that are the pastoring of the church. And really, when I think of being the right place at the right time for them, this is the one couple that we really feel called to walk alongside. And we just often have them over in our home, and we listen to them and pray with them. And it was interesting, the week before we left to come back to Canada this winter, we had them over, and as they were leaving, they said, you know, Rob and Marlene, we've never told you this, but a year and a half ago, we were going to quit. We were going to quit ministry. We were going to get out of this town. We were finished. And we had prayed. We said, God, if you want us to stay, you need to give us a pillar to lean on. And they said, you know what? God sent it. And you've been that pillar for us for the last year and a half. So it was just a real confirmation again that it was the right timing, and God knew them, and he heard their cry. So this is our little house just the week before we were leaving, and it is winter there. It's like minus 41 in Mongolia right now, so it's a little colder than here. Yeah, really, I look at it, and, you know, our journey of stepping out of the boat took us to Mongolia. And but it's God's call for all of us, right? He has a journey for all of us, and he's always calling us to take different steps. Sometimes a step takes us to Mongolia, but sometimes a step just takes you across the street. I'm just going to give you a little story from this summer, because this last summer I grew lots of different flower seedlings, and I grew way too many, and I planted my whole garden full, and I still had more flower seedlings, so I was giving them away to neighbors and different people, and I still had some left. And there's a little store that's just down the road from us, and so I asked the lady, can I come and plant a bunch of flowers in front of your store, because I still have all these flower seedlings left. And she said, sure. So I had tried for almost a week to go and plant these flower seedlings in front of her store, and every time I was about to go, I got interrupted. Oops. Okay, we'll go back. Hang on. Anyhow, so the one day, it was like in the middle of the afternoon, it was 35 above, and I felt like God said, okay, Marlene, go plant those flower seedlings. And I'm like, well, I'm a gardener. You do not go plant flowers, you know, in the middle of a hot, sunny day. That's not a good time. You go plant them early in the morning or late in the evening. But it was a really strong urge, and I knew that it wasn't just my thoughts, right? So I packed up my little flowers, and I took my flowers across to the store, and I started planting these flowers. And a young mom came into the store to buy some milk, and then she came out and she saw me planting the flowers, and she stopped and started talking to me. And to make a long story short, I ended up talking to this young mom for about half an hour. And by the end, this young mom was weeping. And she said, you know, I was so lonely today, and I just needed someone to talk to. And she said, you took time to talk to me. And I came home and I thought, wow, you know, it's not about planting flowers, right? It's about hearing his voice and following. And I think really that's what we want to really encourage you. You know, it doesn't mean, getting out of the boat doesn't mean you have to go all the way to Mongolia. Getting out of the boat means you need to listen to his voice and follow him, because he knows where he wants to take you, and he knows how he wants to use you. And he's building his kingdom. You want to?
Just answer.
You don't want to use the other one?
Oh, yeah, no, I will. But again, yeah, just coming back to this, and like that verse, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them. And for us, it's been a huge journey. I think that little piece in the middle, and I know them. You always think, well, we all know the hearing and following. And often you think, so what's the basis for the following? Why would I follow? You know, I hear lots of things, but why would I follow? And for us, we realize now that the reality is, as we have kind of unwound our story, as we have kind of evaluated the last season, for me, the last 20 years, how God first touched my heart with Mongolia to this point now. And I can absolutely say with certainty that we are where we are by no coincidence whatsoever. Not at all. And I look at who I am and how God has led me in my wiring, that some of the things that I didn't even know that were inside me, the passions and all these things that were in me that God had wired me with. And he has brought those out into the fore now in that location. And I'm operating in a way that I had never imagined that I would operate. And so God knew me, and I can say that verse is written across my heart in a way, and I know them. I know Robert, and I can say that, and that gives you that platform to stand on and say, okay, when I get the hearing, and because I know that he knows me, when I get the next call to move, hopefully it'll be a different story. That I have that foundation, I have that platform to stand on to say, okay, God, I know that you know me, and the direction you're calling us to has things to do with your kingdom, but it's also it's something in me that you want to use in the purposes of your kingdom. And so that gives me a faith to stand on and believe in, that God has good things to come out of that following. And so for us, as we've gone around and shared, you realize, coming back to this verse, you realize, a lot of people, we focus on Peter in this passage and say, oh, Peter's the guy that stepped out of the boat. And I was thinking about, even this morning, I thought, well, there's that incident at the meeting where, it's kind of like us, we stepped out of the boat, but there were 120 people there watching what went on and watching how I responded to it and everything else. There's all the them that were present in all these things where God is doing stuff. There's the them that are part of it. So the other 11 guys in that boat, they watched that whole thing. They were interacting. They saw Peter. They saw what Jesus did. And they saw him pull him out. And they are all part of that story. And I can honestly say that in that instance, I was maybe stepped out of the boat the one time. But a lot of times I've been in the boat. I've been one of the 11 that was observing what someone else did. And that touched my life. And I look at all the interactions of the them that God has brought into my life, and they have often been a catalyst to propel us to where we are now today. And so that's in God's kingdom, in God's economy. He is taking all of us, the them, and intersecting our lives. Even today, you say, well, our lives are intersecting with your lives. You are the them, and we are the them for you. And God is saying, this is the story of the kingdom. And so you realize our thing that we're doing in Mongolia is not something we're doing for us in isolation. This isn't just God making Robert and Marlene happy that they can operate in their giftings. That's not what it's about at all. We realize that and say it's for the world. What we are doing there is for the world. It's for God's kingdom. And God's bringing this 450 different people them into our community. And we've had like 500 to 1,000 day visitors during that time as well. People that have come into our yard and talked to us and seen what we're doing and all these things. That's all of them of the world that are intersecting with the thing that God is doing there. And so for us, it's not about us, and we also feel good that, oh boy, I get to do all the things I like to do. No, it's not about that at all. I'd say I'm operating on more cylinders than I've ever operated in my life, and I enjoy it. There's passion in my life that I've never really experienced before. But you realize, no, this is not in isolation. This is our lives, the thing that God is doing in us is for the rest of the world. And so, when I look at people as we share this story, you think, wow, this is the story of your lives as well. I think, we like to share about what's going on in Mongolia, but in a lot of ways, when we come back to Canada, we say, we want to inspire people to join that thing, to get in that boat. Like it says, Jesus insisted that they get in the boat. And I look at that and say, we all need to get into the boat because the end story is what we want to see. And for me, when you read that passage of the version you read this before, I liked that. It said, I can't remember, they said, yeah, it was just, you're the Son of God for sure, but they said, the sentence leading up to it, I can't remember how it was worded, but it was just, it was more, common English. Yeah, the disciples in the boat, having watched the whole thing, worship Jesus. This is it. And for us, I look at what we're called to. I look at the issues that are in Mongolia and the depth. It's a lot like First Nations there. The issues of alcoholism and abuse and everything else. The baggage those people are carrying, they need profound, profound experiences with God. To experience revelation that, that cuts through all the crap of their lives and says, you are absolutely loved. And for us, it says, statement when you say, when God shows up and the disciples are, they're worshiping. They know, they see this reality. There is undeniably God is here and present. And they worship him and say, this is it. This is truth. This is the Son of God. And for us, this is what we want to see happen there in our community. And it's interesting because we had a word, a while back, where 4 years ago when we really engaged the project and we came back for furlough, and we really had to say, okay, God, are you really calling us back to Mongolia for another season? We'd done 10 years, and you said, okay, are we going to go further? And God gave us a word, and what was the passage?
Well, when we were praying about going back, oops, sorry, here we go again, up and down. No, the disciples had fished all night, and then they came into the store and they had nothing. And Jesus said to them, go back out further and cast your nets. And we knew that God was telling us to go back. And it's so amazing because we've gone out further.
And we didn't know what further was. It says, and cast your nets, into deeper water. And he said, so what does that mean? We're going to go further? Further where? Into deeper what? What's deeper mean? Is this going to be like a darkness? Is it going to be a hard time? Is it going to be whatever? And we realize now you see the picture and you go, oh, that's what it meant, in hindsight. But it was really cool because it says, cast out your nets. And we were just reading a book recently. I don't know if it's called Planted. And we're into kind of this very environment. The thing we're doing is very environmental. We're very organic. We're very whatever. But we're reading a book. It's called Planted by a lady that's connected to a Christian environmental organization. And the quote was that, maybe you say she remembers.
Well, no, the thing that really struck us in that book was it was that community is a net. And it was like God said to us, that's right, just go there and build community. That's going to be the net, and I'm going to catch lots of fish. So, I don't know, we're going back for this next season. We don't know what it's going to look like, but it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of what he's doing, right? And really, we want to say, Jesus, you really are the Son of God, and we could be part of what you're doing. And yeah, thank you so much for opening your fellowship here this morning. We really have enjoyed being part of it, and we have lots more stories, but I think we're having lunch together, so if any have questions, you can ask us during that time. So
thank you.